If you are just getting older, midlife is terrifying. If you can experience joy, that actually is enough reason to be alive. And that when we get to our truth and we embrace it fully, nothing can actually hinder joy. It is a natural reaction to living in the truth. From the moment I became pregnant, I began having psychic experiences. And the rest of my life was about coaching and writing people, because I believe we live in a culture that doesn't adequately explain the full range of our emotional and spiritual lives, and that hurts people.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Well, today's guest is Martha Beck, and she is maybe known as the world's leading coach in the world. And she's written dozens of books, I think 13 books actually. And we go through some of the books that she's written today. She has very, very close with Oprah, very close with Elizabeth Gilbert. But this podcast is not just about her relationship with motherhood and Mormonism. It's not just about meditation and mysticism. It's also an opportunity for her to be my coach. And for about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this session, you will see Martha coaching me and helping me learn how to listen to my body, to be in integrity with what my body's telling me. I'm excited that I am co-leading a workshop with Martha on our Santa Fe campus of MEA at the end of September. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I have to tell you, I had never read The Way of Integrity, and I read it this weekend at exactly the right time. I needed it. I'd had a conversation with somebody on Friday that just didn't go well, and it's somebody I don't know. It's somebody who represents the legacy of a well-known poet, and so the literary estate in essence, and it's turned out better now, but. On Friday, I was feeling out of integrity on something. And I got to tell you, this book, it was like the soul balm I needed. And so I want us to explore your story, which is one of the most interesting stories on the planet. Being a devout Mormon mom and a successful Harvard scholar, and the path you've taken, which has been a path of it and the way of integrity. So are you ready to dive in?
It's what I always think about, me. So, yeah.
Maybe let's start with just your personal story. So for those who don't know you well, maybe you could just tell us who you are, how you grew up, how you willed yourself on. And let's do the full story all the way to, all the way to Karen and Rowan. This will take 5 or 7 minutes at least. So, but I think starting with that, the full frame, and then diving in a little bit will be helpful.
It's so interesting how deep you want to go. It's like, how far do you want to dig the layers of people's stories? Because there's a kind of archaeology of the psyche that goes way, way down. So I'm going to try to keep it from going too far, but also tell the parts that I think might be useful to somebody going through, difficulty. I always sort of think about whoever out there needs some help right now. So I was born in Utah as the 7th of 8 children in a big Mormon family. And in fact, my father was one of the most revered scholars in Mormonism, and he had defended the faith against all kinds of, people who were trying to disprove it, essentially. Anyway, so I grew up that way in this extremely Mormon context. Didn't really know anyone who wasn't Mormon, and it's a life world religion, so it fills every aspect of your day, every aspect of your thinking. Even really is what you're supposed to. You're supposed to make it the way you think. So I tried hard. I wanted to please people, but I was also in school and I was trying hard to please people there. So I did well in school. And when I was 17, I got accepted to Harvard. My father was a great intellectual. And so I think he was very pleased that he had a child who was going off to Harvard. So I went off to Harvard. I ended up getting my BA, my MA, and my PhD there. During that time, I married someone else who'd grown up in my hometown. So we had a lot in common. We got married just before I started graduate school. And then we had a child when I was a year in. And then my second child was conceived shortly thereafter. And this is where it gets weird. From the moment I became pregnant, I began having psychic experiences, things that defied materialist belief. Now, what I had done is I'd grown up really, really Mormon and sort of participated fully in that kind of fundamentalism. At Harvard, starting when I was quite young, I encountered a different kind of fundamentalism, which is a strictly materialist worldview that says, if we can't measure it physically, it's not real. And I was sort of relieved to come out of all that rigidity, the religious rigidity, and sort of relax and, I can trust my brain. Then I had my second child, and he was prenatally diagnosed late in the pregnancy, about 6 months in, with Down syndrome. And so I had to decide whether or not to continue the pregnancy. And I only had a week to do it while it was still legal, very pro-choice politically. But I'd been having all these psychic experiences, and it made me wonder, okay, maybe a more mysterious view of the world, maybe not a religious one, but one that encompasses the mystery, maybe that's more true than the materialism I've been believing. And I'd come to think everything is basically subjective anyway. We can't know that we're not dreaming anything. So I thought, okay, I'm going to... It sounds very blasé. It wasn't. It was a very hard choice. I was 25 years old and not very mature or braced. But I had this child and switched out of all the fundamentalisms that I'd been taught and began to follow the best estimate I had for what was true and for what brought joy. Because I'd come to the conclusion when looking at my son's life that he would never go to Harvard. And that was fine because there were plenty of people around me there that were high achievers and not happy. And I thought, if you can experience joy, that actually is enough reason to be alive. Emerson said, beauty is its own excuse for being. And joy is the felt sense of beauty. It's its own excuse for being. And I looked around me and I thought, I don't see a ton of that here at Harvard. So my whole life became oriented at finding joy. And in the course of that, I had to face the memory of having been sexually abused by my father. And I also had to, the truth has legs, yeah? So I felt like the whole system he was defending was at its heart harmful to a lot of people, racist, sexist, misogynistic. And so I wrote about that. I had become a writer. I wrote a book about my son. And I started writing self-help. I started writing for the Oprah magazine and did that every month for 17 years. When I left Mormonism and wrote about the abuse, it was considered a real, not just someone running off into the sunset, but someone taking aim at the heart of the religion. And I knew there would be backlash. I tripled my life insurance because I knew that some of my father's acolytes were crazy enough to actually physically try to kill me. I got plenty of death threats. They didn't kill me, happily. I mean, makes me happy. But it's not very often that you get a chance to lose your entire culture of origin, to lose every relationship that I'd had before I was 17 years old. So, all my huge extended family, all the friends I'd had in high school, they not only didn't want to hang out with me anymore, it was kind of forbidden, and they all believed that I had committed the one sin worse than murder, which in Mormonism is leaving the church. I had left. So I lived with that, and that made me even more, I will say, obsessed with finding what is true. And I have come to the conclusion that only when we're standing in the truth can we actually experience joy. And that when we get to our truth and we embrace it fully, nothing can actually hinder joy. It is a natural reaction to living in the truth. And the rest of my life was about coaching and writing people to try to help them get in touch with it. Because I believe we live in a culture that doesn't adequately explain the full range of our emotional and spiritual lives. And that hurts people. I've devoted my life to trying to help person by person, book by book, podcast by podcast. It's all about helping people return to a state of joy that we all know in our cells we are meant to experience. That is meant to be our fundamental experience. And I've been lucky enough to experience quite a bit of it.
Wow. And there's more to come, but I'm not diving into that more recent days. But your life, we call the podcast the Midlife Chrysalis. The idea that midlife's not a crisis, but it's a chrysalis. It's a time when transformation is meant to happen. And it does feel like, I think you were about 42 when Leaving the Saints came out. This is the book where you told your truth, told the truth about your father, told the truth that you were leaving the church, which for those who don't know about Seventh-day Adventists and Mormons, or Seventh-day Adventists, no, Church of Latter-day Saints, leaving the church is almost the worst sin. It's worse.
Oh, it is.
It's worse than killing someone.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't know. I would call that a cult, but
if the shoe fits.
You were in what we might call early midlife. How do you perceive midlife? I mean, you have credentials way beyond mine when it comes to understanding the human mind. Why have we gotten midlife so wrong as a culture?
Well, first of all, it's an interesting question because the as I'm sure you know, the human lifespan, the average human lifespan has lengthened so much in the last 100 years, 150 years. So what used to be midlife, 40, was a good solid, like you were halfway done at 40. Now you may die at 80, you may live quite a bit longer than that. Both my parents died at 95. So I'm 62 now. I'm sort of like, okay, yeah, that's kind of the middle patch. It's kind of, but I sort of at 40, I just decided, if you look at the maiden, the mother, and the crone archetype in Celtic lore, I thought, I'm old enough to be a crone. I'm just going to designate myself a crone so I don't have to shift again. And then I can just be middle-aged and happy about it. But, our culture is obsessed with the fear of death. Any creature that has a survival instinct and also the abstract capacity to imagine our own death, even though most of us feel that there will be an exception made in our case, right? But we still have to deal with it. And so people get to midlife, and it's like caterpillars trying desperately to crawl backwards out of the chrysalis and go on growing into bigger caterpillars forever. The fear of death distorts and warps the experience of aging, which in a lot of cultures is about deepening. My undergraduate major was East Asian languages and civilizations. So I lived in Asia and studied Asian philosophy a lot and languages. And the view of aging is very, very different in those historical, not right now, for example, in communist China, it's different, but the ancient Chinese, the aging was considered a venerable and desirable thing. And the aged were the walking encyclopedias, the sources of comfort, the connection with the divine. Because as we get older, we get better at those things. And I have a friend who says some people just get older, but some people become elders. If you are just getting older, midlife is terrifying. If you have in your mind the archetype of the elder and you revere that archetype, it's an honor to get older. It's a joy. It's 2 steps closer to heaven every year. It's beautiful.
We at the Modern Elder Academy talk about a modern elder as someone who's as curious as they are wise. One of the things that you said, you wrote about in your book, the way of integrity is the idea that you lost your religion, but you found your soul. And
Yeah.
would you mind talking a little bit more about that? I mean, having had such a guided path in your life around both your religion, but also your intellectual pursuits, to all of a sudden be in a place where your not just your religion was gone, but also the community that had surrounded you.
Yeah.
Now, your
Yeah.
husband was your ex-husband now is Mormon.
Yes. No, no, no. He was. We both left. Yeah. And he had identified as gay for some time. And then when we left the church, we sort of unofficially unmarried each other. I said, well, where does that leave me? Are you going to date men? He said, well, you do the same thing. And I said, date men? And he said, well, not men. And I was like, oh, I can date women? And it was like, I think I would actually like that. And now I remember you asked me about this and I didn't say, but very soon after that, I was in therapy, thank God. And the therapist, who was very professional all the time, never ever broke the rules. One day she said, I'm going to do something really weird. I've never done this before. It's very unprofessional. She wrote down a name and a phone number and she said, I want you to call this friend of mine. I think you would have a lot to talk about. So I called the friend. We went out to lunch and we ended up shacking up with each other.
Like after lunch?
Significantly after lunch. After a year of lunches, it finally got to the point where I was seriously pleased about the idea of dating women. And so she was my first ever relationship with a woman. I still live with her and she is still my partner. And then about 10 years ago, it was the strangest thing, Chip. I just felt like someone was missing. There was someone missing. And Karen and I talked about it. It was a kind of like we'd been together for 20 years. It wasn't like we were looking for kicks. There was just this odd feeling of someone missing. And then one day I was living on a ranch and an Australian writer showed up to help someone write a book on a different part of the ranch. And she and Karen started hanging out. And one day Karen sat me down and she said, I need to tell you something. I'm having these weird, like extremely loving feelings toward Rowan. And I don't know what it is. And I just leaned back and I remember this bolt of joy. It was like being hit by a train made of joy, carrying a load of joy with joy driving. It was so strange. It hit me so hard. And I said, you're in love. This is amazing. Bring her up to the house. I just was so excited. I looked everywhere inside myself for jealousy. It just wasn't there. Like after all the years of spiritual practice, there was no cultural model in me that said I should be jealous. There was just joy that my beloved was in love. So Rowan came up to the house and we all started talking. And then we all started talking a lot, like all day, every day. And after a few weeks of that, we were like, this isn't weird, right? Like we're just friends, right? This is so weird. We'd never, ever heard the word polyamory, much less decided we wanted to practice it. But we all fell in love with each other. That's just what happened. 3 people fell in love with each other. And it seemed weird at first. 10 years later, it just is like, how do people do it with 2? That's like a 2-legged stool. That just wouldn't even work. So now there's 3 of us, Ro and Karen and I. And we have a 4-year-old because Ro is just barely at an age where she could still do IVF. We're super happy and super weird. Ro calls it feeling good by looking weird. So that's something to do in midlife.
No, this is, I mean, if there's a great message here is do not try to predict your future, because coming from your upbringing, you're being in a throuple. I mean, like, come on, like this is.
Oh my God. Well, here's the thing, Chip. I like to say, people ask me for advice, and here's a sketch. I went to Harvard to try to be Mormon. Then I went back to Utah and turned out to be a lesbian. Then I left Mormonism and started practicing polygamy. It's all very upside down and backwards for
You're
me.
a rebel.
But,
You're just a rebel, Martha.
we're all rebels. Here's the thing. I've coached thousands and thousands of people at this point, and every single one of us is torn from the roots of our joy by socialization and sometimes trauma, but almost always by the cultures that raised us and that surround us, from the interpersonal cultures of our families to the national cultures. And we can see now the national culture is getting very strange and difficult. And if we are freed from culture, then we return to our true nature. And if getting older is going to feel good to anybody listening out there, it will feel good if you return to your true nature.
I'm going to come to that in a moment. I want to just talk about Adam for a moment. You have now 4 kids. You have 2 daughters, and then Adam with your husband, your ex-husband.
Yes.
And one of the books that broke you out as, one of the most well-known writers in the world, and ultimately, frankly, maybe the most famous life coach in the world. I'm sorry, it's a lot to handle, but if you do a chat GBT about you, guess what? That's what it says.
I should find that man and pay him. Oh, he's not a man, he's a machine. Sorry.
What did you learn? What wisdom did you learn from your son who has Down syndrome and who is now, how old is he now?
He's 37.
Tell more about the Adam story.
So I was almost 6 months pregnant with him when I got the diagnosis of Down syndrome, as I said before. And I mentioned that I'd been having these sort of paranormal experiences. Actually, I now think they are fully normal experiences. I would, for example, my then husband was traveling in Asia, and when I was thinking about him and he was thinking about me, I would see vividly exactly what was happening around him. Something I later found out was called remote viewing. I don't know at that time if anyone had even named it, but it's something that has been studied now. That was the primary one. But I also had things like precognition. I just knew things that were going to happen to various people, sometimes in the world, and they kept getting borne out by actual fact. So it exploded my view of what was real. And at the same time, I was fully invested in the culture of Harvard, and I was, finishing my doctorate, wanted to be a professor. I was completely bought into that. And here I have a child who is never going to succeed in that particular way at all. So the psychic part of it, the mystery part of it was, I could have maybe shaken that off and gone back to just being like a normal Harvard PhD candidate. But then to have a child who would never succeed in that way gave me a very strong source of motivation to re-examine my values, to re-examine what a human life is about and what it's worth. Because I was told by all 5 of the doctors there at the University Medical Clinic that it was like I had a malignant tumor and I was not allowing them to take it out. And I thought, okay, so they think he's a malignant tumor. What makes people think that? And I started questioning the set of values that said our intellect makes us worthwhile.
I think, therefore I am.
Yes. Actually, Descartes famously said, I think, therefore I am. But our culture, that's the only part we quote. But what he really said is, all I know is that I'm not sure of anything. I doubt. Therefore, I am thinking. Therefore, I must exist. Dubito cogito ergo sum. It was not, I think, therefore I am. It was, I doubt. Therefore, I'm thinking. Therefore, I must exist. So it was, everything in his philosophy was based on uncertainty. And that's also what I found in the Asian religions and philosophies that I'd studied as an undergraduate. There's something called don't know mind. So an Indian sage I love, Nisargadatta Maharaj, says the only true statement the mind can make is, I do not know. It does not know for sure. So once I fully embraced that, and I embraced a child who would also not know, the whole world blows open when you decide to accept the fact that you may not know anything. And so you're open to experience, you're open to instruction, you're open to love, you're open to other people. It just leaves you open and it never closes. And that's a radical ride, but it's so worth taking.
And then he arrived. The name of the book is, I think, Expecting Adam. Adam arrives in your life. He's been in your life for 37 years, plus the pregnancy period. And what have you learned from him? What wisdom does this child, who might have been aborted by another Harvard PhD candidate?
And by the way, I would totally drive you to that appointment. I would not judge anyone out there who's terminated a pregnancy. Never.
What wisdom have you learned from him?
That there is something to be found in stillness and in silence beneath language that is deeply, deeply wise, that is the source of all our joy, and that is the only way to navigate this world without being destroyed by it. Yeah, he just operates at a frequency so deep. He doesn't talk much, and that's another thing he's taught me. Everything's about energy. Everything is about the energy created by our nervous systems, by our hopes, by our dreams, by our laughter. He's a being of energy. That's the way he communicates. That's the way he lives. That's the way he connects. And he's done so many paranormal things in his life. I don't even talk about them. People wouldn't believe them anyway. But I've seen him work miracles when he feels like it. He just doesn't do it very often. And he's taught me that the world is the mystery, and that if we engage with it from a sense of a field of energy encountering another field of energy, then miracles happen constantly. And you get a very different view of what consciousness itself really is. That it's actually having experiences through you and through him. Only in him, it's not hidden. In us, it is.
At one point in the book, The Way of Integrity, you talk about your name is Stillness. And you just spoke of stillness with Adam. And everybody has to read the book. I'm not going to explain what happened, because there's coincidence is just, a little, wink from God. But I think that one of the things I really took from the book, The Way of Integrity, was this sense that when you're not integrated, when you're not, Eric Erickson, late in life, he said the last stage of the 8 life stages was integrity versus despair. To me, integrity is the form of, we're not just growing old, we're growing whole. We're learning to alchemize curiosity and wisdom, extrovert, introvert, male, masculine, feminine, gravitas, depth, levity, laughter, secular, spiritual. Talk a little bit about this idea of Psycho-Neuro-Immunology, I think is what it is, which is
that's one of the things I'm obsessed with.
Yes, yeah. It's this idea that when you're not in integrity, you don't have that wholeness. Physical symptoms actually show up, and your body is keeping score. So talk about that personally for you, and then what you've seen over the course of your life as a coach.
Well, one of the reasons I became a coach was that I had a lot of, I was told that they were autoimmune, poorly understood, progressive, and incurable illnesses. So by the time I was in my 20s, I was already experiencing massive amounts of chronic pain and different sort of failure in different organs at different times, different muscular parts of my muscular system. I just experienced a tremendous amount of pain and disability. And that makes you very curious about exactly how your body's working, especially when you're told it's autoimmune, that my immune system was attacking itself, which kind of leads to the conclusion that it's designed to fight its own worst enemy. So I was my own worst enemy. So that was another source of inspiration, motivation for me to look at how I was thinking. At the time I started being diagnosed with these, we didn't really know how plastic the brain really is, how malleable it is, and how it's constantly repatterning itself based on what we're thinking about. We can actually change physiological structures with our thoughts, not metaphorically, but measurably in the brain. I know you know all this stuff, but it blew my little mind because I remembered reading in a psychology book when I was 13 that the brain is fixed after 5. And I'm like, I just sat there with this book going, I am screwed. I'm 13 years old. My psyche was fixed at 5. I'm a total brain wreck. This is my life. So in the 90s, when they discovered that the brain was plastic, I got very, very excited. And I spent a lot of time studying, yes, psycho-neuro-immunology is how the thoughts and the psychological conditions in our minds, what we call our minds, are affecting our physiological systems. I also started studying things like the way meditators have different brains than other people. And I started looking at mystics in cultures around the world from time immemorial, because there is something called a shaman sickness. Have you heard of a shaman sickness?
Is that when the shaman takes on the illness or the sickness of the person that they're treating, or no?
No. It's actually the opposite. It's that someone who is meant to be a healer begins to experience an incurable illness, and it will not respond to any kind of treatment. And I have a friend in South Africa. I just got back from there, and his wife 2 years ago was diagnosed with diabetes, and we were very worried about her. She was hospitalized. I went back a year. I go there every year. The next year she was still sick. This year I was driving along with my friend, and he said, my wife woke up 2 months ago and said, I don't have diabetes, I have a calling. And so they had taken her to Western medicine. They had taken her to the local, the native healer there. Here's the thing. If you get sick and you can't get healthy, in virtually every ancient culture around the world, there is an assumption that you might have a shaman sickness, which means that you are being guided to learn to be a healer. And until you decide to be a healer, you will remain ill. So my friend told me she went to the Sangoma, which is the word for shaman in the local dialect. And she started to train as a Sangoma. And he said her health is perfect now. It's fine. When I decided I was going to spend my life trying to help and guide people, there was no word for it in our language, but I started to recover. So I have these progressive incurable illnesses. They were, surgically verified. I just have no symptoms. And I believe it's because I was meant to live this kind of life, the kind of life I'm living now, and to be able to say in public, yes, I went to Harvard a bunch. And yes, I completely believe in spiritual realities. And yes, I know that people think I'm an idiot for it. And I respectfully do not care. As long as I can live in this way and devote my life to the service of other beings, I'm perfectly healthy. So yeah, that's one ancient practice and wisdom that's come down from all these different cultures that is now being reflected and measured in the instruments of Western scientists. And they call it psycho-neuro-immunology.
Let's explore for another few minutes the way of integrity. And when someone is out of integrity, they can feel it, and the body sometimes shows it. For me, I had a NDE. I had a near-death experience at age 47 and died 9 times over 90 minutes, went to the other side, and
Wow.
it woke me up. And I changed my life rather dramatically right there in classic midlife. I'm curious if you could just give some instruction. Let's give some prescriptive tips. Your book is full of amazing exercises, the way of integrity is. And maybe just give us the short version of how do you help a person shift out of the cultural norms that have defined them, move into this place of not lying to themselves and others, and then open themselves up to the liberation that comes from that. Because that is a chrysalis. What you've described is the ultimate chrysalis that so many people face. And often they do face it in midlife because, as Carl Jung talked about, you can't live the afternoon of your life based upon the rules of the morning. But people try to do the rules of the morning all the time with some filler in their face and hanging out at the gym. And what's a prescriptive tool for people to know that would be helpful to actually integrate themselves so they can feel more whole.
Okay, let's just get this out of the way. We can move on to better things. Okay, so the first thing is just to notice something about yourself. Pascal said that most of our misery comes from the fact that we cannot sit quietly alone in a room. So just notice, how comfortable are you sitting quietly alone in a room? Like if I asked you right now, it would probably be you're very comfortable sitting alone in a room.
Yeah, I love it, actually. I mean, in fact, I've gotten to a place in my life where I'm actually sort of preferring it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Before your NDE, before that experience, how comfortable were you sitting quietly alone in a room for, say, an hour?
When I was a kid, I was an extreme introvert. So yes. And then I moved into this era because I was a closeted gay man who wanted to be an all-American athlete and student body president and marry my college girlfriend. And
You're my ex-husband,
yes, I'm
Chip.
your ex-husband. I am. And so I became a social alchemist, and I was very good, and I still am very good as a social alchemist. So the answer to that would be, it was hard for me to be alone because it took me back to childhood when I was not a very happy kid, but I preferred my aloneness than being in a social setting.
Yeah. So what happens to most of us is we accrue a set of accommodations to our culture. Let's call it accommodations, but I could also more brutally call it lies. We learn to act as if we're fine. We learn to place our value in things like what we've achieved. And when we're left alone in a room, what happened to you is the truth of everything we've lived struggles to come back into consciousness so that it can help us sort out what we really want. And some of that is very, very painful because it's trying to guide us away from things that are not truly ours. But we've identified with those things. So, like I've noticed this, I'm moving house right now. We're moving to a different place. And I've noticed that I have some resistance to letting go of physical objects. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I've gotten attached to that. How interesting. And I have craved sitting alone in a room so that whatever attachments I have to objects can come up, be examined and grieved and allowed to go away. So that's the first thing. Can you sit quietly alone in a room? If you can't, it's because there are things that you believe innocently that are not true for you at a deeper level. So the second thing is allow yourself to sit quietly in a room and let yourself feel what comes up. And this is not easy, by the way, layer after layer after layer until you find a place inside you that feels still. If you can find a place inside you that it feels completely still, one way I help people sort of access this is by telling them that of every atom in your body, 99, this is a real statistic I'm about to give you, 99.999999999999% of that atom is empty space. The actual matter is practically negligible. You are made of space. So if you imagine, nothing can move space, nothing can destroy it, nothing can harm it. It just is. If you can shift your attention away from being matter and instead experience the space inside your body and realize, I am space. Switch from matter consciousness to space consciousness. That often will take you into this stillness. And in the stillness, if you bring in a thought that is true, like the person I love who died is not really gone, there will be a sense of this settling of the body and the mind, even if it violates the edict of your culture. And if you say something to yourself that is false, like there's so much I have to achieve before I'll be worthy, it will feel like hell. It will immediately destroy any kind of peace that is there inside you, not to hurt you, to guide you. All suffering is guidance. And almost all the guidance is guidance about letting go of things that aren't true. So simple. But we identify so strongly with our thoughts that letting go of them feels like death. And we're terrified of death, so we don't let go. If you can learn to let go of the thoughts that make you, that hurt, You will find yourself in your integrity. You will find yourself in peace. You will find yourself in the mystery, and you will find yourself deeply loved by everything that exists. So it's worth the time.
And is what you just described sort of what you call an integrity cleanse?
No, that's just an exercise I just made up because you asked for it. An integrity cleanse is where you say, I am going to refuse to lie for any reason to anybody, but especially not to myself, for a given period of time. So you've mentioned that lying causes ill health. They've done experiments that are very, very basic. They just take two groups of people, well, three, there's a control group. And then they say to one group, don't lie so much. And they send them out for 3 weeks. There's nobody following them. There's no one policing them. They come back 3 weeks later, and compared to the group that was just told a story, the people who have committed not to lying so much have fewer doctor visits, fewer colds, better health indicators. Just saying, okay, I won't lie quite as much for 3 weeks measurably helps people's physical health. So it depends on how radical you want to get. I get very radical with my integrity cleanses. Like, I won't even lie with my facial expression, and then you go out and do it for a while, and it will, it's a wild ride, and it will set you free.
Well, but won't it piss some people off along the way?
Oh, yes. That's why nobody I ever grew up with will ever speak to me again. It's not small. And that's why I recommend to people, just start slow. Start by not lying to yourself. Start by noticing that you're lying to other people when you do. Somebody says, oh, I wish you'd come over. And you say, I wish so too. Oh, okay, I'm lying. I don't want to.
Your newest book and the topic of our workshop, September 22nd to 27th, is called Beyond Anxiety, Curiosity, Creativity, and Finding Your Life Purpose. You said something a moment ago around truth and lying and about the messages that, one of the things you say in that book is anxiety isn't a problem, it's a messenger. It's a portal, not a pathology. So in many ways, what I hear you saying as sort of a consistent theme here, as much as you don't want to, sometimes people don't want to hear what's going on inside of them. And in the process of not wanting to hear it, they make themselves sick.
Yeah.
Actually, in the case of anxiety, feeling the anxiety and knowing it's a messenger and then trying to decode the message and take action accordingly that's what leads to a healthy response to anxiety. Is that accurate? Give us a little bit more.
I will give you a little bit more. And I go into the brain science of it and everything in the book, but here's a really, really basic way to go about it. Think about whatever it is that brings you the most anxiety. There are plenty of reasons. Do you want to play right now?
Yeah.
Because, okay, so what right now brings you the most anxiety?
So being a 3 on the Enneagram, my biggest anxieties tend to revolve around public success and failure. And so an anxiety would be not being successful with MEA, for example. And so that would be one that I'll speak to.
So what's the scariest thought you could think?
That it would fail, and I would be, perceived as this guy who just, spent a fortune on trying to do something that didn't work, and people would say, well, he was a fool.
Okay, so that's a whole conglomeration of stories. Let's just start with MEA is going to fail. All right, so that feels horrible. It physically feels horrible. Notice how your body responds to it.
I feel it in my shoulders and my neck.
Mm-hmm. There's always tension, there's always weakness, and then comes mood change, and then comes illness when we believe something that is not true. The interesting thing is, it's not always good news. I had one client who was a doctor who was working with a man who was terminally ill, and his family said he's terrified of death. Don't tell him he's dying. Tell him he's getting better. And the man was horrible. He threw tantrums. He threw objects. He was awful. And then finally, one day, this client of mine who was a physician sat down with him and found herself blurting, look, you only have a week to live. You might want to live it. And what she said was, he took this huge breath in and said, oh, thank God. Because It was the insanity of knowing this at some level, knowing he needed to prepare to die and having everybody pretend he wasn't dying. It was making him insane. So it's not just that it's a happy thought, but let's switch to the opposite of your thought, MEA will fail. Simple enough. Here's what I want people to remember. The exact opposite of your worst fear, of your worst thought, the exact grammatical opposite of that is your next step toward enlightenment. So yours would be pretty simple. MEA will not fail. MEA will succeed. So sit with that and feel it in your body and allow yourself to put brackets around the moment so that you don't have the little doubts and worries. Just have to stay out for a while and just allow yourself to fully imagine how you would feel if you believed that this will be a very successful venture.
The good news is that I have felt that, and I know that, and it's when what triggers this failure worry. Sometimes it's looking at the monthly P&L, the financial statement, and saying, "Okay, we're off budget." But sometimes it's having 2 or 3 very close people in my life tell me, "You know what?" And they're very. I mean, one of them is, I won't say because I want to be private. Somebody very close, very, very close, say, maybe it's time to not do this anymore."
Say that to yourself. Maybe it's time to not do this anymore, and just be very, very still and attentive to what naturally comes up. Don't try to change the feeling, just notice it. So maybe it's not time to do this anymore.
Well, I have stage 3 prostate cancer, and when I was going through 19 months of no testosterone, hormone depletion therapy, 2 surgeries, and 36 radiation sessions, as we were opening our Santa Fe campus, I do know that when I was hearing that from him in particular, there was some logic in it, but I'm now in my cancer's in remission, and I feel better, and I don't believe that this is not what I'm supposed to do. I deeply believe this is a vocation and a calling, and I, on a daily basis, have reminders of that.
So what is the physical? I'm going to come back relentlessly to this. What do you feel? Not the story around it, not anything but the actual physical sensation that you find in your body when you say, I should stop doing this. It's time not to do this anymore.
When I feel that, I actually feel some terror. And the terror is, I think it was Mark Twain who might have said, there's 2 most important days in your life, the day you were born and the day you figured out why. And that figured out why piece to me, I'm not doing this for money. I've not paid myself in 7.5 years. I'm not doing this for ego or for attention. I'm doing it because I love George Bailey, Jimmy Stewart, and It's a Wonderful Life. And I love when Clarence the Angel comes down to the bridge and helps George see what Bedford Falls would be like if he had never lived. I love the end of Schindler's List when all of those descendants walk by the grave of George Schindler. I think we need to, the technologists in Silicon Valley need to figure out a technology that allows us as humans while we're living to see that effect we've had on other people. Actually in psychology, they call it the George Bailey effect. So I know that, but then I think sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just delusional.
So do you notice, this is fun. Do you notice how I keep saying, let me be really clear. The words I'm looking for, and I love these stories, by the way. The words I'm looking for are things like, I feel tension in my shoulders. That really, and do you notice how when I said, it's time to stop, I shouldn't do this anymore, I saw a pullback and a tension, and your face took on this look of, no, that told me everything I needed. Your body doesn't accept that as the truth. It's that simple. Then you went into an argument in your mind with this loved one and why you keep going and your larger philosophy and all the things. I like to boil it down. This is what living with a son with Down syndrome who doesn't speak much and who doesn't have stories in his head. This is what it's taught me. If it feels bad, maybe it's not true. And that's the only story you need. So now let's look at the opposite of it. It's not time to stop yet. Now say that, and your whole immediately every micro expression in your face changes to something relaxed and peaceful. That's the whole thing. I call it the body compass. See, now you're going very deeply into your truth, and that brings tears of relief. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Yes, it does.
That's all. The body is a holy instrument to me, and it will not lie. And the mind, pardon my French here, but my mind is a two-bit whore. That's not a sex worker. I mean, a two-bit sex worker. But that's the old-fashioned phrase. And what I mean by that is it will go after every cultural story it hears and try to spin ideas and facts to convince other people I'm okay. But all I need to know is when you think the thought, I should stop, everything recoils. And when you think the thought, it's not time to stop, you went into this deep relaxation internally, and I can feel it. I couldn't feel you. And I mean, I feel literal physical, like electrical sensations when somebody finds truth. The field of their electromagnetic nervous system, I guess, reaches me somehow because I tangibly, physically feel it. I couldn't feel you when you were in the stories about why you should stay. But when you said, it's not time, and you let yourself go there, boom, there's an energy that literally connects with me through, I don't know how it does it over Zoom, but it does. That energy field, I believe, is going to take very good care of your body. It will keep you healthy as long as you're meant to be healthy. And when it's time for you to put the body down, it will gracefully lay itself down. But we had all we needed when you felt that, that live on that path.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I just got a little dose of what's going to happen at the workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, Marty. I'm going to call you Marty. So imagine someone younger than you comes to you and says, I won an auction to have coffee or tea with you next week. And I'd love to have you come to the tea or coffee with a bumper sticker, not a physical one, but a sort of a proverbial one, a bumper sticker of the wisdom you've learned in your life, just a singular one. What would be on that bumper sticker, and what's the origin story if it's not something you've already told us?
I mean, the one that pops to mind is a quote from Goethe, the German poet, who said, "When you trust yourself, you will know how to live." I truly believe that there is a center point in each of us that is made of space and stillness and silence, and yet is intensely alive. I think it's life itself. And if we trust it, if we trust ourselves, because that is who we truly are, is that part, the part that is pure life, pure love, pure consciousness. If you trust that and make all your decisions so that you feel aligned with that, you will never make a choice that will be damaging to your life or to the lives of others. So yeah, when you trust yourself, you will know how to live.
Especially when you measure your life based upon joy.
Oh yeah. Well, when you trust yourself, you experience joy. That's how you do it.
I love you. This has been joyful for me. As a guy who started a company called Joie de Vivre and ran it for 24 years, I'll finish with a quote from J.D. Salinger, who said, "Happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid." And so happiness is circumstantial. Joy really comes from within you. So I'm overflowing joy right now. Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the end of September, and I hope that many of you who are listening will join us.
Thank you so much, Chip. It's a real honor to be here.
Well, I just got a free dose of Martha Beck coaching. Wasn't that interesting? In listening to Martha's story, which is one of the most miraculous stories I've ever heard, given just where she started and where she's come to at age 62, I would say 3 of my key lessons there are just the value of integrity, the value of trusting your gut, trusting your body, trusting guides beyond what you expect, the coincidences of life. Learning how not to lie to yourself is maybe one of the most important things we need to do. And maybe one of the challenges of midlife is because for so many people, by midlife, they realize it's what they're doing no longer works. As I say in the episode, Carl Jung says, you can't live the afternoon based upon the rules of the morning, because by the afternoon, there'll be a lie. So, how do you live in integrity? I think that's one lesson. Number 2 is the key lesson about just both anxiety and what's happening in your life are messages. And are you listening to them, or are you distracting yourself? Often we use alcohol or whatever it is to distract ourselves, work, to not listen to these messages. But in these messages, there's a curiosity bridge, language that she didn't mention today, but is part of her book, Beyond Anxiety. The idea that curiosity is a pathway to exploring things that you might not consider. And that curiosity bridge opens up new options in your life. So I would just say that was a second lesson. I think a third lesson just really speaks to this idea that she went through death threats. She went through a period where she had to basically leave her family, her blood family, but also her Mormon community. You could say that, in essence, she had to die. It was the death of the ego, the dark night of the ego. It was not so much the dark night of the soul. And she survived it, and she has thrived. And look at how happy and joyous she is today in a very unusual kind of relationship. This is not the way she was brought up, and yet it's the way she wants to live her life. And so I guess what I would say is, for those of you who have the fear that you're going to live into your integrity of who you truly are, in whatever way that means, it may mean that some people will no longer want to be in your life. That may be fine, because there may be a whole new collection of other people who are magnetized to be with you as a result of you living authentically. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful and deep episode. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.